Welcome back. We're diving back into diplomacy in Denmark for the sixth time in our series.
Mm.
Today we're going beyond those typical pictures we all have.
Mm.
Suited ambassadors, grand embassies.
Right. It's a really fascinating area to look at, especially for a country like Denmark.
Exactly, small but mighty, right?
Yeah.
And just a quick reminder before we really get going, this entire series is AI-generated but meticulously fact-checked by Bastian Freiburg. No need to worry. Now let's look at what we have here. These sources paint kind of a surprising picture of Danish diplomacy.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
So one of the things that I was really surprised about is the role of the Danish royal family. I mean, we all know they travel a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not like just waving and smiling.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually, according to our sources, actively involved in promoting, Danish values, Danish interests abroad.
Yeah, it's a really good example of how diplomacy has kind of evolved. It's not just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs anymore. Businesses, universities, even athletes and chefs are all kind of contributing to Denmark's global image. You've probably even engaged in some diplomacy yourself without realizing it.
Wait, really? I'm just trying to enjoy my vacation.
Like, have you ever traveled abroad and talked about, Denmark's social welfare system or its approach to sustainability?
I mean, yeah, I guess.
That's public diplomacy. Sharing perspectives, shaping perceptions.
Huh. So we're all like mini ambassadors in a way.
Yeah, precisely. And that kind of brings up an interesting question. If everyone's a diplomat these days, does that mean the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is less important?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, if everybody's already out there doing their own thing,
Right. Do we even need that central authority?
yeah.
Well, actually, all of our sources argue the opposite. They're saying that the ministry is more important than ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in this kind of environment. Think about it like an orchestra.
Right.
You've got all these, talented musicians, but you need somebody to conduct them.
Ah, to keep everybody on the same page.
Exactly. And make sure that they're all playing the same tune.
So that's what the ministry does.
Exactly. They provide that strategic direction, analyze global issues, all that stuff.
Okay, that makes sense.
Make sure Denmark has a coherent foreign policy.
And our sources actually point to Denmark's successes in areas like EU policy and development aid. They even say that other countries are studying Denmark's approach. What are they doing so well?
Well, one key factor is that they take this joined-up approach. They weave together development, security, trade. It's all interconnected.
Oh, interesting.
Recognizing that those issues are all linked. It's not just about doing things well in isolation. It's about seeing how everything fits together.
That's clever.
Yeah, and that interconnectedness is really important in today's world. One source, it describes modern diplomacy as medialized, democratized, and politicized.
What does that even mean?
Well, think about it. Diplomats are operating in this 24/7 news cycle with social media commentary, instant global communication.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, everything they do is scrutinized, debated in real time.
Wow. So how do they even achieve their diplomatic goals with all of that going on?
It takes a whole different set of skills, communication, strategic messaging, being able to adapt really quickly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so when we're trying to analyze foreign policy, it's not just about reading treaties and agreements anymore.
Right. It's about understanding these dynamics.
It's about all the other stuff, too.
Exactly. The actors involved, their strategies, how domestic and international forces play off each other.
Right. And not just what they say they want to do. It's what actually happens.
Exactly. The outcomes.
Which, can be hard to figure out and interpret.
Oh, for sure. And there are different ways of looking at it, too. Different theories.
Oh, right.
Like neorealism. They focus on the power dynamics between states.
So it's all like, who's got the most power?
Yeah, basically. Alliances, strategic maneuvering, kind of like a chessboard.
Okay.
But then you've got neoliberal institutionalism, and they emphasize international organizations and cooperation.
So more about, like, working together.
Right, exactly. Shared interests, finding common ground. But even with all of these theoretical frameworks, you can't forget about the human element.
Right.
Individual leaders, their personalities, their biases, their experiences.
No, that makes sense.
All of that shapes a country's foreign policy. Think about how different leaders might respond to the exact same crisis.
Oh, that's so true. You could have two countries facing the same situation and get completely different outcomes.
Yeah, exactly.
This kind of makes me think about, our listeners here in Denmark. Have you ever considered how what's happening here at home, our national politics, influences things happening internationally?
Yeah, it's a really important question.
Do you think what happens domestically has global ripple effects.
It absolutely does. What happens on the home front has a huge impact on foreign policy.
So it's all connected.
Yeah, exactly. Domestic, international politics constantly influencing each other. And one really powerful example of that is this concept of securitization.
Oh,
We touched on that
Can I
earlier.
know what that is again?
Basically, it's when an issue, any issue, is framed as a security threat. And that drastically changes how it's handled, both domestically and internationally.
So just by calling something a security threat, you can like change what happens.
Exactly.
Wow, that's interesting. Can you give me an example?
Okay, so imagine a country that's experiencing a wave of immigration.
Okay.
Now, you could frame that as a social issue, right?
Yeah.
Or an economic issue.
About like resources and integration.
Right. But if you present it as a security threat,
Right.
suddenly the focus shifts to, border control, surveillance,
Oh.
even military involvement.
That's completely different.
Right. The whole narrative changes.
Wow.
And the policy responses change with it.
So something that seems domestic, like immigration, can suddenly have huge implications for foreign policy.
Exactly.
That's a good illustration.
Yeah, it really underscores how interconnected everything is.
Wow. I'm really starting to see how much deeper all of this goes than I initially thought. You know, diplomacy, it's not just those classic images of ambassadors and embassies.
No.
It's the royal family, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, businesses, everyday citizens.
Hmm.
And to analyze foreign policy, you have to understand not just those international relations, but the personalities, the domestic politics, even just how we use language.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot to take in. Absolutely. It's a lot more complex than people might realize.
It really is. But let's maybe look at some specific areas of Danish diplomacy now. Our sources highlighted their development aid program, like how involved they are globally.
Yeah, and Denmark really stands out there. They're consistently one of the top donors.
Always exceeding those international targets.
Yeah.
So they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Yeah.
But what sets their approach apart from other countries that are donating?
Well, it's not just about how much they give, it's about their whole philosophy.
Oh, okay.
They're really focused on promoting human rights, good governance, sustainable development.
I see.
It's about empowering those partner countries, not just giving handouts.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And do they prioritize any specific areas within their development work?
Oh, absolutely. They really concentrate on areas where they think they can make a real difference.
Like where?
So education, healthcare, gender equality, those are some big ones.
Okay, so a very targeted approach.
Yeah, focusing on those key areas. And this actually ties back to that joined-up approach we talked about before.
Oh, right.
They see development, security, trade, it's all connected.
It's all part of the same puzzle.
Exactly.
Okay. And speaking of interconnectedness, what about Denmark's relationship with the EU?
Ah, yes, the EU.
How does that play into all of this?
Well, it's a cornerstone of their foreign policy, really. They see it as this platform to amplify their voice on the global stage,
Oh, interesting.
to advance their values, their interests.
So they're not just sitting back and letting things happen.
No, not at all. They're very active in shaping EU policy.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They're known for their skilled negotiators and have played a key role in influencing EU policy on all sorts of issues.
Like what?
I mean, you've got climate change, trade agreements, lots of things.
Wow. For a relatively small country, they sure have a lot of influence.
Yeah, they do.
What about security policy, though? It seems like Denmark is really focused on diplomacy and development. How does that fit with things like defense and military involvement?
It's a great question. It really highlights some of the complexities that Denmark has to navigate.
Okay.
They are deeply committed to peaceful solutions, but they also recognize that having a strong defense is still necessary.
So it's finding that balance.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
between peacemaking and power.
Peacemaking and power.
They're a big supporter of NATO, and they've participated in various international missions,
Okay.
but they always try to prioritize dialogue, conflict resolution.
So not pacifist, but they see military force as a last resort.
Exactly. Always looking for those peaceful alternatives first, and I think that's really what makes Danish diplomacy unique.
Yeah, it is a very nuanced approach, combining strength with compassion. It's really fascinating to see how they put those values into action. We've talked about the royal family, the ministry, businesses, even regular people. What about academics, though? Like research institutions, what's their role in all of this?
That's a crucial aspect for sure. Diplomacy isn't just handshakes and negotiations.
Right.
It's also about understanding the world. You know, the history, the culture, the politics.
You got to have that background knowledge.
Exactly. You need those insights to navigate all those challenges effectively.
So universities and research institutions, they're kind of providing all of that.
Yeah, exactly. They give you the analysis, the data, the historical context,
Okay.
and that informs those diplomatic strategies, the policy decisions.
So they're the brains behind the brawn, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it. And Denmark really gets that. They've invested a lot in research and education, especially in those areas like international relations, diplomacy, global affairs.
Smart.
They understand that you need both knowledge and action for diplomacy to be effective.
That's really impressive, this whole system they've built, all these different actors playing a part. But no system's perfect, right? I'm curious, are there any areas where Danish diplomacy faces challenges?
Yeah, you're right. No country gets it perfect. And one critique that you hear sometimes is that Denmark's emphasis on consensus building, on soft power, can make them hesitant to take strong stances
Oh, interesting.
or to make bold decisions.
So trying to please everybody and then maybe their message gets lost.
Yeah, that's the potential downside.
Okay.
And there are also some who say that their close relationship with the EU could limit their flexibility on certain issues.
Right, where they might have different national interests. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about securitization, though? Could that ever be a problem for a country like Denmark, with their emphasis on diplomacy and human rights?
It's a valid concern for sure. Like we discussed before, framing something as a security threat can lead to those more aggressive or restrictive measures.
Right.
And that could potentially undermine the values that Denmark's trying to uphold.
So even a country that's so committed to peaceful solutions, they could still be tempted to use that tactic to get what they want.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility, something to be aware of. It reminds us that this world of international relations, it's rarely black and white.
Right.
Even the actors with the best intentions, they face these tough dilemmas.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's always more complicated than it seems at first glance.
Absolutely. But even with those challenges, there's a lot to admire about how Denmark approaches diplomacy. I mean, they consistently punch above their weight, showing that a small country can still have a big impact.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's really inspiring to see how they use their resources and expertise to really make a difference.
And it highlights just how interconnected everything is in diplomacy.
Yeah.
What might seem like a purely domestic issue can have those ripple effects globally and the other way around.
That brings us back to our listeners again.
Yeah.
We've talked about Denmark's role, but what about your own? And this world is getting more and more interconnected. How do you see yourself fitting in?
That's a really good question to think about. What can you bring to the table? Your skills, knowledge, your perspective.
Yeah, and what kind of world do you want to see? How can you use your voice and actions to help shape that future?
And remember, diplomacy is not just for diplomats and politicians anymore. It's
Yeah.
something we all participate in, whether we realize it or not. Yeah, it's a big question. It makes you really think about your place in the world.
And it's not about, finding the right answer. It's about being open to the conversation,
Right.
challenging those assumptions that we all have.
And seeking out those different perspectives.
Yeah.
Recognizing that the world is complicated, there are rarely any easy answers. And even Denmark, a country known for its diplomacy,
Right.
even they have to make tough choices.
It's true. Something that really struck me during our conversation is just how important historical context is.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to understand how Denmark does diplomacy today,
You have to know their past.
you have to look at their history. It provides those valuable lessons.
Right. And you can see that in their journey, from the Viking Age to today. Navigating this complex world, it's shaped them. Their diplomatic DNA, their focus on collaboration, how important alliances are to them.
Yeah, and it really shows you that diplomacy isn't static.
Right.
It's constantly evolving.
Adapting to whatever's happening.
Yeah.
So what about the future? What do you think diplomacy will look like in the years to come? What kind of challenges is Denmark going to face?
Well, one thing's for sure. The world's going to get even more interconnected and more complex. Globalization, technology, climate change, all of those forces are going to continue to reshape everything.
So diplomats are going to need to be even more adaptable.
Absolutely. Tech savvy, able to navigate those interconnected challenges.
Right. And they'll need to engage with a wider range of actors, too.
Yeah, for sure. Not just governments and international organizations, businesses, NGOs, even individual citizens. It's about building those bridges, fostering dialogue.
Finding that common ground.
Exactly. In a world that's getting more and more diverse, and recognizing that diplomacy isn't just about those formal negotiations.
Right.
It's about building those relationships, fostering trust, understanding those different perspectives.
As we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm actually feeling pretty optimistic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We explored all these complexities, the challenges of diplomacy, but we've also seen what's possible when people connect with each other
Right.
and the potential we all have to contribute to a better future.
Denmark's story shows us that even small nations can have a huge impact.
They really can. And it's inspiring, to see their commitment to making a difference.
Mhm.
It makes you think about your own role
Exactly.
in shaping a more peaceful and just world.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to stay curious, stay engaged, and remember, diplomacy isn't just for diplomats. It's something we all take part in every single day.
That's right. Through our words and our actions.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into diplomacy in Denmark. We'll be back soon to explore how other countries are navigating this global stage.